The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such panic. Ambassador Zeth-Ka of the Thylorian Collective stood at the center podium, his blue-scaled hands shaking as he held the data pad. Around him, representatives from 47 star systems sat in their floating chairs, all eyes fixed on the horrifying images displayed on the main screen. The Void Swarm had returned. Honored council members, Zeth-Ka began, his voice barely steady. 3 days ago, the outer colonies of Kepler 452 went silent. Our investigation teams found this. The screen showed twisted metal and organic matter fused together in impossible ways. What had once been a thriving city of 10 million beings was now a writhing mass of biomechanical horror. Strange creatures moved through the ruins, their bodies shifting and changing as they fed on the remains of the dead. The swarm adapts to everything we throw at it, continued Zeth-Ka. Our plasma weapons only make it stronger. Our energy shields become part of its structure. Every battle teaches it new ways to kill us. Council member Veltara of the Centauri Federation leaned forward. How many worlds have we lost? 17 confirmed. 23 more have gone dark in the last 6 hours. A wave of terror swept through the chamber. The Void Swarm had first appeared 300 years ago from beyond the galactic rim. Back then, it had taken the combined might of 50 civilizations to barely push it back into the void. Now it had returned and it was stronger. What about the Terran Reserve? Asked an elderly Altarian representative. Surely they can help. Zeth-Ka's scales darkened with worry. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had watched Earth from a safe distance. The humans were too violent, too unpredictable. They fought wars with weapons that could crack planets. They had never accepted the galactic peace treaties that had kept the galaxy stable for 50,000 years. The humans are primitive, Zeth-Ka said carefully. They still use kinetic weapons. They fight each other constantly. Their military doctrine is based on something they call total war. But they fight, said Veltara quietly. When was the last time any of us truly fought? Not a police action or a border dispute, but real war? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. The Great Peace had made the galaxy soft. Their weapons were designed to disable, not destroy. Their tactics focused on minimizing casualties, not achieving victory. They had forgotten how to kill. The Void Swarm had no such limitations. I have prepared a message, Zeth-Ka announced, his voice heavy with defeat. Earth has been monitored for centuries. We know they understand galactic basic language. If we offer them full citizenship, advanced technology, and unlimited resources, you want to make a deal with savages? Interrupted the Draconian ambassador. I want to survive, Zeth-Ka replied. The question is, are you willing to live with the consequences of what we might unleash? The vote was unanimous. Desperation had a way of making moral choices simple. The message was transmitted on all frequencies toward the small blue world at the edge of the Orion Arm. People of Earth. The Galactic Council formally invites humanity to join our civilization. We offer advanced technology, vast resources, and full citizenship rights. In return, we ask for your assistance in defending our worlds against an existential threat. Time is critical. Please respond immediately. The response came back in less than 4 hours, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't have existed with technology no one understood. Galactic Council, we accept your offer. Transmit coordinates for immediate deployment. Military assets are already moving. Advisory, clear all civilian traffic from target zones. We don't do surgical strikes. The Deathbringers are coming. Admiral Sarah Chen, United Earth Space Command. The message ended with attachment files containing something called Rules of Engagement and Acceptable Losses. Parameters. When the translation computers finished processing them, half the council members fled the chamber. The humans had turned war into a science. Zeth-Ka stared at the empty seats around him and wondered what they had just done. The Void Swarm was death incarnate, consuming everything in its path. But the humans were something else entirely. They had spent their entire history perfecting the art of killing their own kind. What would they do to aliens? 3 days later, the first human ships appeared at the edge of Thylorian space. They didn't look like any vessels in the galactic database. Where alien ships were smooth and elegant, human ships looked like they had been built for one purpose: war. The UES Prometheus led the fleet. It was massive, angular, and covered in weapon ports that made seasoned military analysts physically ill. Energy readings showed power outputs that should have been impossible for a ship that size. Galactic Council Station, this is Admiral Chen aboard the Prometheus. We're ready to begin operations. Transmitting tactical requirements now. The requirements list was 17 pages long. The humans wanted detailed biological samples of the void swarm, complete star charts of affected systems, and something they called acceptable collateral damage assessments. That last item made Zethka's blood run cold. The humans weren't just planning to fight the swarm. They were planning to win, no matter the cost. As the human fleet moved toward the first infected system, Zethka received a private communication from Admiral Chen. Ambassador, I want you to understand something. We've been watching your civilization for 3 centuries. You've achieved something beautiful. Peace, prosperity, advancement without violence. We respect that. But you've also forgotten something important. Sometimes the only way to preserve life is to become very, very good at ending it. The swarm made a mistake when it threatened innocent people. We're going to remind the universe why Earth's children are called Deathbringers. The transmission ended, and Zethka was left staring at the tactical display. 47 human ships against a swarm that had consumed entire star systems. He should have felt hope. Instead, he felt a growing dread that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The humans weren't coming to save them. They were coming to teach the galaxy what war really meant. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching the alien delegation board her ship through the viewport. The Thylorians moved with the careful grace of beings who had never known true fear. That was about to change. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, the alien representatives are requesting a tour of our conventional weapon systems. They want to understand our capabilities. Chen smiled grimly. Take them to Base 7. Show them the Punisher rounds. The Thylorian military attaché, Commander Silnara, had spent 20 years studying human transmissions. She thought she understood their primitive technology. Kinetic weapons were simple, metal projectiles accelerated by chemical explosives. Her people had abandoned such crude tools millennia ago in favor of elegant energy weapons. She was not prepared for what the humans called a conventional weapon. The Punisher round was 3 meters long and weighed 800 kilograms. The human weapons officer, Lieutenant Morrison, explained its function with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Standard ship-to-ship kinetic penetrator, tungsten carbide core surrounded by a depleted uranium jacket. Impact velocity of roughly 30,000 meters per second. The warhead contains what we call a disruption package, essentially a small nuclear device designed to activate after penetration. Silnara's translator implant struggled with several terms. Nuclear device? You put atomic weapons inside your projectiles? Just the small ones, Morrison replied cheerfully. For the big targets, we use these. He gestured to a massive cylinder that took up half the weapons bay. This is what we call a planet cracker. Technically, it's a relativistic kinetic impactor with a concentrated antimatter core. You have weapons that can destroy planets? Well, not destroy exactly. More like reorganize. We try not to use them unless absolutely necessary. Commander Silnara's report to the Galactic Council was classified at the highest level. Her recommendation was simple. Do not anger the humans. Meanwhile, in the ship's science laboratories, Dr. Marcus Webb was examining void swarm specimens with the enthusiasm of a child at play. The aliens had provided him with tissue samples, captured biomechanical components, and detailed behavioral analyses. Fascinating, he murmured to his assistant. Look at this cellular structure. It's completely modular. Each cell can reprogram itself based on external stimuli. No wonder their conventional weapons are useless. Dr. Kethva, the Thylorian xenobiologist assigned to the human team, watched nervously as Webb began dissecting the samples. The swarm adapts to any attack. That's why it's unbeatable. Webb looked up with bright eyes. Unbeatable? Who told you that? This is magnificent engineering, but it's not unbeatable. It's just very, very good at what it was designed to do. But whoever designed it made some assumptions about how their enemies would fight. What do you mean? Webb held up a sample under a microscope. Look here. The adaptation mechanism relies on pattern recognition. It learns from repeated exposure to similar stimuli. But what if the stimuli aren't similar? What if every attack is completely different from the last? Kethva stared at the human scientist with growing horror. You want to make it impossible for the swarm to adapt by constantly changing your attack methods? Exactly. We'll never use the same weapon twice. Every encounter will introduce new variables. We'll make the adaptation process itself into a weapon. Webb's smile was terrifying in its innocence. The swarm thinks it's fighting civilized beings who follow predictable patterns. It has no idea what it's actually facing. On the command deck, Admiral Chen was reviewing tactical reports with her alien counterparts. The first joint operation would take place at the Helix Nebula, where Void Swarm forces had cornered what remained of the Centauri defense fleet. The swarm has established a standard siege pattern, explained General Morthex of the Centauri. They surround the system, probe our defenses, then gradually adapt until they can overwhelm us. We estimate 6 days before our shields fail. Chen studied the tactical display. The swarm had deployed classic encirclement tactics, cutting off escape routes and slowly tightening the noose. It was textbook military strategy, if you were fighting a conventional enemy. Here's what we're going to do, Chen announced. My ships will approach from these coordinates outside the swarm's detection grid. We'll use what we call a broken arrow formation. The aliens looked confused. General Morthex consulted his tactical database. I don't recognize that formation. You wouldn't, Chen replied. We invented it for fighting enemies that adapt. The formation is designed to look random and disorganized, but it's actually highly coordinated chaos. Every ship operates independently but within predetermined parameters. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, protested the general. Chen's smile was cold. General, your people have been fighting for survival using honor codes and established doctrine. The swarm adapted to that. We're going to fight using principles that don't exist in any military textbook. We're going to make the swarm think it's fighting a completely insane enemy. The first phase began 18 hours later. Human ships approached the Helix system from 7 different vectors, their movements appearing completely random. They used no formation flying, no synchronized maneuvers, and no predictable attack patterns. The Void Swarm responded exactly as expected. It began adapting to what it perceived as chaotic human tactics. Swarm organisms started moving in seemingly random patterns, trying to mirror the human approach. That was when Admiral Chen revealed the trap. All ships, execute Protocol 7. Let's teach these things why chaos is just another form of order. What the swarm had interpreted as random movement was actually a complex, mathematical sequence designed by human combat AIs. Every random maneuver was precisely calculated to put swarm forces in exactly the wrong position at exactly the wrong time. The results were devastating. Swarm organisms found themselves clustered in kill zones, their adaptive algorithms completely overwhelmed by tactical mathematics they couldn't comprehend. Commander Silnara watched the battle from the observation deck, her hands shaking as human weapons tore through swarm formations like a hot knife through ice. Energy beams that could adapt to any defense were useless against projectiles that never followed the same trajectory twice. Armor that could regenerate from any damage couldn't handle weapons that didn't damage. They simply removed matter from existence. But it was the psychological warfare that truly horrified her. The humans had somehow convinced the swarm that its own adaptation mechanisms were betraying it. Swarm organisms began attacking each other, their programming corrupted by human electronic warfare techniques that shouldn't have worked on non-digital entities. How? She whispered to Admiral Chen. How did you turn their greatest strength against them? Chen's response would haunt the galaxy for generations. Commander, you asked us to fight an enemy that adapts to everything. We didn't adapt to the enemy. We made the enemy adapt to us. There's a difference. The Battle of Helix Nebula lasted 14 hours. When it was over, the Centauri defense fleet was safe and the Void Swarm was gone. Not defeated. Simply gone as if it had never existed. The galaxy celebrated humanity's first victory. But in the secure communications channels between government leaders, a very different conversation was taking place. They had asked for aid. They had received something far more terrifying. They had learned what happened when a species that had perfected warfare in all its forms decided to go to war. The humans weren't just fighting the Void Swarm. They were rewriting the rules of conflict itself. Colonel Maria Santos crouched in the ruins of what had once been the industrial complex of Kepler 422b. Her Death's Head battalion spread out in a tactical formation that would have made alien military instructors weep with frustration. Her soldiers moved through the swarm-infested facility using techniques that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They weren't fighting the swarm. They were hunting it. Echo 7. This is Alpha 6, Santos whispered into her comm unit. Target confirmed. One large biomechanical cluster. Approximately 50 organisms. Initiating Protocol Nightmare. Behind her, Sergeant Jake Morrison assembled what human engineers called an improvised deterrent device. To any sane observer, it looked like Morrison was building a bomb out of spare parts and prayer. In reality, he was creating a weapon specifically designed to exploit the swarm's adaptive biology. Colonel, Morrison reported, the package is ready. Fair warning, this is going to get messy. Santos nodded grimly. Protocol Nightmare wasn't just about killing the enemy. It was about making the enemy afraid to be killed. The first phase involved something human psychologists called learned helplessness conditioning. Santos's team had spent 3 days studying this particular swarm cluster, learning its defensive patterns and adaptation cycles. Now they were going to teach it that adaptation was useless. The attack began with conventional weapons, plasma rifles, energy grenades, standard military equipment. The swarm responded predictably, adapting its armor and defensive systems to counter the energy weapons. Within minutes, the organisms had become nearly immune to the human assault. Then Santos gave the signal. Morrison's device activated, flooding the area with a specific electromagnetic frequency that interfered with the swarm's biological communication network. Suddenly, the organisms couldn't share adaptation data with each other. Each creature was fighting alone, unable to learn from its neighbors' experiences. That was when the real attack began. Human soldiers switched to weapons that didn't exist in any galactic database. Kinetic harpoons that delivered chemical payloads designed to rewrite the swarm's genetic structure. Sonic disruptors that convinced swarm organisms their own bodies were enemy targets. Psychological warfare techniques that worked on creatures supposedly without minds. The swarm tried to adapt, but every adaptation triggered new attacks from completely different vectors. The creatures that survived the kinetic weapons were destroyed by biological agents. Those that adapted to the biological agents were torn apart by sonic weapons. The few that survived everything else were eliminated by human soldiers using improvised weapons that shouldn't have worked, but did. But the true horror came in the final phase. Santos activated what the humans called a conversion protocol. Instead of simply killing the remaining swarm organisms, her team began the process of turning them into weapons. Target acquired, reported Corporal Lisa Chen, Santos's biowarfare specialist, beginning neurological subversion. Using techniques developed from centuries of studying their own biology, the humans began rewriting the swarm's fundamental programming. The creatures that had once consumed entire worlds were slowly, systematically converted into hunter-killer organisms, programmed to seek out and destroy their own kind. The process took 6 hours. When it was complete, the converted swarm organisms were released back into the wild, carrying within their modified genetic structure a new imperative: kill everything that shared their original DNA signature. The alien observers from the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence as humanity's first ground operation concluded. They had witnessed something that defied every principle of civilized warfare. The humans hadn't just defeated the swarm, they had turned it into a weapon against itself. Ambassador Zethka's report to the Council was marked with the highest security classification. The humans do not fight wars. They conduct extinction events with surgical precision. Recommendation: under no circumstances should humanity ever be given cause to consider us enemies. Dr. Webb's scientific team made their breakthrough 3 days later. Working around the clock, they had successfully reverse-engineered the swarm's adaptive mechanisms and weaponized them. It's beautiful, Webb announced to the gathered alien scientists. The swarm's biological structure is like a sophisticated computer program written in DNA. And like any program, it can be hacked. Dr. Kethva stared at the modified swarm organism in Webb's laboratory. It looked identical to the original, but its behavior was completely different. Instead of consuming and adapting, it was systematically hunting down and destroying other swarm specimens. You've created a predator that feeds on its own species, Kethva whispered. We've created the perfect swarm killer, Webb corrected. It thinks like the swarm, moves like the swarm, and looks like the swarm, but it's programmed to recognize any unmodified swarm DNA as a target for elimination. It's a biological virus designed to spread through their population and trigger mass autodestruction. The implications were staggering. The humans had essentially turned the swarm's greatest strength, its adaptability, into a fatal weakness. Every time the swarm tried to adapt to the modified organisms, it would only make the infection more virulent. "How long?" Kethva asked. "Before this weapon eliminates the entire swarm population?" Webb consulted his calculations. "Based on current infection rates and the swarm's reproduction cycle? 6 months for complete species extinction. Maybe less." The laboratory fell silent. The assembled alien scientists stared at the humans with a mixture of awe and terror. In less than 2 weeks, humanity had developed a weapon capable of exterminating an entire species across multiple star systems. That night, Admiral Chen received an encrypted communication from the Thailorian government. It wasn't a military report or a diplomatic message. It was a simple question. "What happens when the war is over?" Chen's response was equally simple. "That depends on whether anyone gives us a reason to keep fighting." The message was forwarded to every government in the galaxy. Within hours, 3 major star systems had formally requested human protection agreements. 12 others had begun immediate military modernization programs, abandoning their elegant energy weapons in favor of crude but effective kinetic systems. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson. Peace was a luxury that could only be afforded by those capable of winning wars. Captain Jake Morrison's Special Operations Team achieved their most spectacular success 2 weeks later. Deep in swarm-controlled space, they infiltrated a hive world using tactics that blurred the line between warfare and science fiction horror. Morrison's team didn't assault the planet. They didn't even land on it initially. Instead, they deployed what human engineers called environmental modification packages, devices that began subtly, altering the planet's atmospheric composition. The changes were so minor that the swarm's sensors didn't detect them. Oxygen levels shifted by less than 1%. Trace minerals in the air were replaced with chemically similar, but biologically incompatible compounds. The electromagnetic spectrum was gradually altered in ways that interfered with swarm communication networks. Over the course of 3 days, the planet's environment was slowly transformed into something that looked identical to what the swarm needed, but was actually toxic to their biology. The swarm organisms began dying without ever understanding why. Their adaptive mechanisms triggered, trying to adjust to the environmental changes, but every adaptation only made the toxicity worse. The creatures that survived the atmospheric poisoning were driven insane by the communication interference. When Morrison's team finally landed on the planet, they found a world littered with swarm corpses and populated by creatures that had been driven to attack anything that moved, including each other. The planet was secured without a single human casualty. The footage of Morrison's operation was transmitted to the Galactic Council and immediately classified. But rumors spread through the diplomatic community like wildfire. The humans had somehow convinced an entire planet to commit suicide. Ambassador Zethka stared at the classified reports piling up on his desk and realized the truth that would define the next era of galactic history. They hadn't hired mercenaries to fight the swarm. They had invited apex predators to demonstrate why they were the apex. The war room aboard the UES Prometheus had become a shrine to applied brutality. Wall-mounted displays showed the systematic dismantlement of swarm forces across 17 star systems. Each victory was marked with clinical precision, casualty ratios, resource expenditure, time to completion. To the human officers, these were simply statistics. To their alien allies, they were monuments to controlled horror. Admiral Chen studied the latest intelligence reports while sipping coffee that could dissolve metal. The Void Swarm was adapting again, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of developing better defenses, it was retreating. "Analysis, Dr. Webb?" Chen asked. Webb looked up from his biological warfare station, his eyes bright with the enthusiasm of a man who had found his calling. "The swarm is exhibiting behavior consistent with learned trauma response. Our psychological warfare techniques have convinced it that engagement with human forces results in species-level extinction threats. In simple terms, we've taught an interstellar plague monster to be afraid of us." The breakthrough had come 3 weeks earlier when Webb's team successfully deployed what they called the paradox virusites, a biological weapon that convinced swarm organisms that their own adaptive mechanisms were enemy attacks. The results had been spectacular and horrifying in equal measure. Infected swarm creatures would attempt to adapt to their own biology, triggering an endless feedback loop of self-destruction. Entire hive worlds had been found empty, their populations having literally evolved themselves out of existence in a matter of days. But the most disturbing discovery came from Captain Morrison's deep reconnaissance missions. The swarm wasn't just retreating, it was trying to communicate. "Admiral," Morrison reported via quantum entanglement communicator, "you need to see this transmission. The swarm is attempting to establish diplomatic contact. The message, when translated, was simple and terrifying. Please stop. We will leave. We will not return. Please stop." The alien observers in the war room stared in stunned silence. The galaxy's greatest existential threat was begging for mercy from creatures it had considered primitive savages just months earlier. "What are your intentions?" Chen asked Morrison. "Standard response protocol, Admiral. We've prepared a demonstration of improved weapon systems to ensure the message is properly understood." Chen nodded. "Proceed." What followed would be remembered as the most one-sided engagement in galactic history. Morrison's team deployed a weapon that human engineers had designated as theoretically excessive for anything smaller than a moon. The device generated what was essentially a controlled black hole, allowing humans to delete matter from existence with surgical precision. The targeted swarm fleet, nearly 800 vessels, simply ceased to exist. No explosions, no debris fields, no trace that they had ever been there. The weapon literally edited them out of reality. The swarm's next message was transmitted across every frequency in known space. "We surrender. We withdraw. We will not return to this galaxy. Please confirm receipt." Ambassador Zethka found himself in the unprecedented position of serving as a mediator between humanity and the Void Swarm. The negotiations, if they could be called that, took place aboard a neutral station at the edge of galactic space. The swarm's representative was unlike anything in the galactic database, a biomechanical entity that had apparently been designed specifically for communication with other species. It spoke in perfect galactic standard and demonstrated an understanding of diplomatic protocol that suggested intelligence far beyond what anyone had previously suspected. "We acknowledge our error," the entity stated. "We did not recognize that this galaxy was already claimed by an apex predator species." Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair. "You're referring to humanity? Your species demonstrates characteristics consistent with Omega-level biological warfare capability. You weaponize concepts that we cannot comprehend. You turn our greatest strengths into extinction-level vulnerabilities. By all biological metrics, you are the dominant predator species in this region of space." Zethka interrupted nervously. "The humans are not the dominant species. The Galactic Council represents 47 civilizations with far more advanced technology." The swarm entity's attention shifted to him with mechanical precision. "Correction. 47 prey species with sophisticated feeding mechanisms. Your technology is optimized for resource gathering and comfort maximization. Human technology is optimized for threat elimination and survival assurance. From our perspective, only one species in this galaxy has achieved true evolutionary success." The statement hung in the air like a death sentence. For the first time in galactic history, an outside observer had analyzed their entire civilization and dismissed it as elaborate food preparation. "What are your terms for withdrawal?" Chen asked. "Complete evacuation of this galaxy within 1 standard year. Establishment of exclusion protocols to prevent accidental re-entry. Transmission of detailed biological and technological specifications to ensure your species can identify and eliminate any swarm remnants that might pose future threats." Chen considered this. "And in return, continued existence." The negotiations concluded with the signing of what would become known as the Treaty of Void, the first interstellar peace agreement between humanity and a non-human intelligence. The terms were simple. The swarm would leave and never return, and humanity would not pursue them into intergalactic space. But the real negotiation was taking place in the corridors outside the conference room, where alien diplomats were having desperate conversations about the implications of what they had witnessed. "They made the galaxy's greatest threat flee in terror," whispered the Draconian ambassador to his Altarian counterpart. "What does that make them?" The question was answered 2 days later, when humanity announced the Formation of the Terran Protectorate, a defensive alliance offering military protection to any species willing to accept human oversight of their security protocols. 12 civilizations signed immediately. Another 15 began emergency military modernization programs, abandoning their elegant energy weapons in favor of human-designed kinetic systems. The remaining 20 contacted Earth directly to inquire about defensive technology sharing agreements. Only 3 species refused all contact with humanity. They were the oldest, most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, ancient races that had achieved technological transcendence millions of years ago. Their response to humanity's offer was polite, but firm. "Thank you, but we prefer to handle our own security." Admiral Chen's reply would become legendary in diplomatic circles. "Understood. Our offer remains open. Should you change your minds, you know how to reach us." The message was accompanied by detailed specifications for something called a Class 7 strategic deterrent, a weapon system capable of sterilizing entire star systems in minutes. The technical documentation was marked as preliminary design specifications and included a note: "For educational purposes only. Production models may vary." The 3 ancient civilizations reconsidered their position within hours. By the end of the week, 46 of the galaxy's 47 member species had requested formal alliance with the Terran Protectorate. The Thylorians were the last holdout, and only because Ambassador Zeth Ka was paralyzed by the realization of what they had done. They had asked humanity for help, and humanity had helped them. But in doing so, they had fundamentally altered the nature of galactic civilization itself. "The humans aren't conquerors," Zeth Ka explained to the emergency session of the Thylorian Parliament. "Conquerors want to rule. The humans just want to make sure no one can threaten them or their allies. They've turned protection into a weapon. What does that mean for us?" Zeth Ka stared at the treaty documents on his desk. "It means we're safe. Safer than we've ever been in our history. It also means we're completely dependent on the goodwill of a species that has just demonstrated they can eliminate any threat to their interests with casual efficiency." The final decision was unanimous. The Thylorian Collective formally requested membership in the Terran Protectorate 3 days later. Humanity's response was swift and professional. "Welcome to the Alliance. Please submit your military specifications for modernization review. Initial security assessments will begin immediately. Thank you for your trust." The message was signed by Admiral Chen and included an addendum: "Remember, we're here to help." Somehow, that reassurance was the most terrifying thing of all. The memorial wall in the Galactic Council chambers stretched for nearly a kilometer, each inscribed name representing a species that had gone extinct since the end of the Void War. Young Cadet Kiravel of the Thylorian Space Defense Force stood before the monument, trying to understand numbers that didn't make sense. "Instructor Moore Kane," she asked, "the dates on these memorials, they're all after the war ended. How did so many species die after we won?" Instructor Moore Kane, a veteran of the old Galactic Defense Force, looked uncomfortable. "Those species didn't die in battle, Cadet. They chose extinction rather than accept the new galactic order." The truth was more complex and more disturbing than any official record would acknowledge. Humanity's victory over the Void Swarm had saved the galaxy, but it had also fundamentally changed what it meant to be alive in civilized space. The first extinctions had been voluntary. The Ethereal Collective, a species of pure energy beings who had transcended physical form millions of years ago, simply dissipated themselves rather than exist in a universe where biological creatures could weaponize concepts like reality and existence itself. Their final message was philosophical: "We cannot comprehend a cosmos where matter can be convinced to edit itself. We choose the simplicity of non-existence." Others followed. The crystalline hierarchy, silicon-based life forms who had achieved perfect mathematical understanding of the universe, discovered that human weapons violated fundamental constants they had believed were absolute. Rather than accept that their understanding of reality was incomplete, they chose to stop existing. But it was the voluntary extinctions that truly horrified the surviving civilizations. 12 species had simply looked at humanity's military capabilities and decided that existence itself was no longer worth the risk. Cadet Kiravel studied the memorial's most recent edition, the Pacifist Collective of Vega Prime. Why did they choose extinction? Humans never threatened them. They chose extinction because humans existed, Morcaine explained carefully. The pacifist collective had spent 10,000 years building a civilization based on the absolute impossibility of violence. When they learned that humans could weaponize peace itself, their entire philosophical foundation collapsed. The reference was to an incident 6 months after the war's end. A diplomatic dispute between two minor species had escalated to the point where military intervention seemed likely. Humanity had offered to mediate. The mediation consisted of Admiral Chen meeting with both sides and explaining, in careful detail, exactly what would happen to any species that initiated military action in Terran Protectorate space. She provided technical specifications for weapons that could target specific genetic markers, turn entire populations against each other using modified pheromones, and convince planets to alter their own orbital patterns. Both sides agreed to peaceful arbitration within hours. The dispute was resolved without a single shot being fired. The pacifist collective's final transmission was brief. Peace enforced by the threat of absolute annihilation is not peace. It is merely delayed extinction. We choose the certainty of chosen death over the uncertainty of imposed survival. Cadet Kiravel moved to another section of the memorial wall, where the names were carved in different materials, metals, crystals, and substances that seemed to shift and change as she watched. What about these? Were these voluntary too? Morcaine's expression darkened. No, Cadet, those were the species that chose resistance. The first species to openly challenge the Terran Protectorate had been the hegemony of Rigel, an ancient warrior culture that refused to accept human military superiority. They had launched what they called an honor challenge against Earth, demanding single combat between their greatest champion and humanity's finest warrior. The humans had accepted. The combat lasted 14 seconds. The Rigelian champion, armed with energy weapons that could shatter mountains and armor that could withstand the heart of a star, was defeated by a human soldier using what appeared to be a simple kinetic rifle. The weapon, they later learned, fired projectiles that existed in a quantum superposition until impact, allowing them to bypass any known defense system by technically not existing until they were already inside the target. The hegemony's response to their champions' defeat was to declare total war on humanity. The war lasted 6 hours. The Rigelian home system was not destroyed. It was not conquered. It was simply edited. Every Rigelian in the system found their genetic structure rewritten to remove the neurological pathways associated with aggression and territorial behavior. They remained physically and intellectually identical, but they could no longer comprehend the concept of violence. The transformation was permanent and hereditary. Within a generation, the hegemony of Rigel had become the most pacifist civilization in galactic history. That's worse than extinction, Kiravel whispered. The humans called it corrective evolution, Morcaine replied. They offered to reverse the process if the Rigelians requested it. None ever did. As far as humanity was concerned, they had solved the problem of aggressive species permanently. The galaxy's response had been immediate and decisive. 43 civilizations formally requested immediate integration into the Terran Protectorate. The remaining 4 attempted to unite in military alliance against humanity. The alliance of free species lasted exactly as long as it took for human intelligence services to identify their leadership structure. The alliance's military commanders all received identical packages delivered simultaneously across 17 star systems. Each package contained detailed technical specifications for a weapon specifically designed to eliminate their individual species. The weapons were all different, some biological, some technological, some that seemed to violate basic physics. Each was accompanied by a note. For your review and consideration, we hope this information proves educational. Please note that these are considered obsolete by current standards. The alliance dissolved within days. 3 of the 4 member species immediately applied for Protectorate membership. The 4th, the proud Dominion of Tau Ceti, chose exile to intergalactic space rather than submit to human protection. Their final message was broadcast on all frequencies. We go willingly into the dark. Let it be recorded that one species chose dignity over safety. Cadet Kiravel reached the end of the memorial wall, where a single name was carved in simple earth metal: Humanity, Protectors and Destroyers. Why is humanity listed on their own memorial? She asked. Morcane was quiet for a long moment. Because the species that existed before the war, the humans who fought the Void Swarm, they don't exist anymore either. War changed them just as much as it changed the rest of us. It was true. The humans who had returned from the Void War were different from the ones who had left Earth. They had seen what they were capable of when truly unleashed. They had learned that they could weaponize concepts that other species couldn't even imagine. They had discovered that they were very, very good at ending things. Are you afraid of them? Kiravel asked. Morcane considered the question carefully. No, Cadet. I'm afraid of what the galaxy would become without them. We've grown dependent on their protection. We've forgotten how to defend ourselves. What happens if humanity ever decides we're not worth protecting? As if summoned by his words, Admiral Chen's voice echoed through the memorial chamber. She was giving the annual address to the Galactic Council, a tradition that had developed since humanity's integration into galactic society. Fellow citizens of the galaxy, Chen's voice was warm and professional. Another year has passed in peace. No major conflicts, no existential threats, no species-ending crises. Our protective protocols continue to maintain stability across all Protectorate space. I want to thank each of you for your continued trust in our partnership. The speech was broadcast across 46 star systems to beings who hung on every word. It was a reassurance that they were safe, that the monsters in the dark were being kept at bay by bigger monsters who had chosen to be their guardians. Remember, Chen concluded, we're all in this together. The galaxy is large and dangerous, full of threats we haven't encountered yet, but as long as we stand united, as long as we trust each other, there is nothing in this universe that can threaten our way of life. Thank you for your attention and thank you for your faith in humanity. The transmission ended, and the memorial chamber returned to its respectful silence. Cadet, Kiravel stared at the vast wall of names, species, that had chosen extinction rather than accept a universe where peace was maintained by the threat of absolute destruction. Instructor, she said finally. Was it worth it? All this death, all this fear. Was saving the galaxy worth becoming this? Morcane looked at his young student and gave her the only honest answer he could. Ask me in 100 years when we see what the humans have become, and what we've become under their protection. The one thing I know for certain is this. They saved us all. Whether they saved us from the Void Swarm or from ourselves, that's a question we may never be able to answer. As they left the memorial, neither of them noticed the small plaque near the entrance, installed by human engineers with their characteristic attention to detail. They begged for aid. We answered. The galaxy learned that salvation and damnation are often the same thing,